Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Safe Room featuring security side quests. I would throw it to Shannon to say.
Thanks, Tristan. Also nailed it. So we were talking in the back how I wasn't going to be able to do that line, and Tristan nails it every single time. So I threw it to him to do that. But welcome, everybody. We're super excited to have you here watching the Safe Room again, featuring Security Side Quest. If you don't know about Security Side Quest, Tristan has been the host of that show. We've now merged and combined because what better way to merge superpowers together, right?
Yeah.
And create an epic show. So today we're actually going to be talking a little bit about security foundation, specifically in the cloud. And we have some pretty epic knowledge sharing and as well as challenges for you to all do on your own time. So you can level up not just by watching the stream, but also by doing a couple more things that we suggest in order to gain those skill sets. So while everyone gets settled in, though, we have a very important question for everybody. First one is, where are you from? And then your second one is, what is your favorite movie?
Yes. I know, really tough questions to start off with. First, starting out, where is everybody from? And then going over to that second piece. Put it in the chat.
Yeah.
What is your favorite movie? This is an interesting debate, right?
Yes.
We're trying to
Yes.
figure out how do you classify favorite movie?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can.
I don't know. But before we dive in, while everyone's putting your answers in the chat of where you're from and your favorite movie, I'll just introduce myself really briefly. My name is Shannon Brazil. I'm an incident responder with the Customer Incident Response Team. It's a mouthful at AWS. It's this Customer Incident Response Team CERT. So what I do is essentially if a customer has a security event within their cloud environment on the customer side of the shared responsibility model, my team and myself are there to help throughout the entire incident response lifecycle, conducting analysis, conducting remediation, recovery where possible, and so on and so forth. Tristan, what
Yes.
do you do?
So on my side of the house, I am part of the professional services team. You may ask what that is. Well, I am a security consultant that helps customers accelerate their adoption of AWS security best practices as they migrate to the cloud and just run their operations on the AWS cloud. So fun times.
Amazing. So we also have a guest on our show as well. So we'll bring in Phani Karne, who has been a part of our show in the past as well. But so welcome back. Super excited to have you here. Um, let's do a quick introduction. So what do you do? Where are you from? And what's your favorite movie?
Hey, excited to be back. My name is Phani Karne. I am a solutions architect. That means I help different users of AWS figure out how to architect on AWS. That means build on AWS and figure out which services might be relevant for them. And then on the security side, I focus on identity, which is around authentication and authorization. My favorite movie is The Matrix, especially because it has a lot of what do you call themes that are security related. Even though you might not see it on the in the directly, but they talk about kind of themes related to encryption or command and control, and so it's just really cool. And that's one of the early movies where I really got into kind of computers and cybersecurity and all that. So that's my favorite movie.
That's so interesting that you say that because like I never thought of it in that sense, and now I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch The Matrix
It's
just to
deep.
get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I always just thought it's like, oh, shiny motion, that kind of thing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
like the
that's the
motion,
interesting part.
right? I was like,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah, and it's funny because you pick something computer related, and in my head, my favorite movie goes back to Ninja Turtles, the first live action one on screen, where you
Mm,
can see the puppets and the people's faces in their mouth. But I digress on that. I think that's up there for me from the live action animated. I also have to mention a Disney movie. Shout out to Mulan fans out there. So Mulan is my favorite Disney movie. So had to
love it.
put that in there as well.
Love it. Favorite movie. Hmm. I would have to say, and it's one that I really hope gets a sequel in the future. but I don't know if it ever will. District 9, it's very much sci-fi. If you've seen it, you love it. If you haven't seen it, you have to watch it. It's like action-packed, emotions, there's sci-fi, there's a twist. It's so cool. I loved the entire thing. I would watch it over and over again. But I would also watch a sequel. I would hope for a sequel.
Yeah, that was a really good movie. I remember seeing that, and I was just like, oh, I want some more of this. Oh, does he turn into the spoilers? You know, I know it's like 20 years later, but spoilers on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Spoilers.
All right, cool. So, Tristan, what are we here to talk about today?
So today we have an epic quest, as you mentioned before, and as we start to dive into it, what we wanted to kind of correlate, and we brought an expert on today, Phani, to talk about this, is understanding some of the cloud security fundamentals. And what better way to understand cloud security fundamentals than, let's say, correlating to something? What can we correlate it to? How about a medieval castle? And when you think of a medieval castle, there's certain things and plots and all those items in between that goes into it. But we also wanted to throw a little bit of gaming in there. So the title of the show is Your Resources Are in Another Castle. I think that ties it together a little bit, right? So when you think of your resources, you think of a castle, some cloud security fundamentals. We start to think of the shared responsibility model. We start to think about, hey, how do we develop a basic security strategy with cloud security in mind, right? Our target state. And then we also start to think of, hey, what are some of the challenges on trying to implement that strategy? And I think those are some interesting points to start off with, because there's a lot of basics that individuals may skip over because they want to get to all the cool stuff, right? They want to get to all the shiny matrix type flow without understanding the computer stuff that goes behind it, right? So that's why we wanted to have Phani come on and kind of speak to some of these points, to speak to what the fundamentals of cloud security is. I think that sounds like a plan, right, Phani?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned some of that. We talked about some of that. But I'm biased towards identity because that's kind of where the journey starts, and that's how you understand who's doing what, who has access to what. So shout out to services like IAM and Identity Center. Those will be key, and I hope everyone's taking advantage of them. But you can't forget about logging and monitoring. If you know Bollywood or South Indian movies, there's a Rajinikanth who's really famous. He's like the Chuck Norris of South India. But he has a movie. He has a famous movie called Robo or Robot. You might have seen clips of it on YouTube. And there's a song in there, and he's singing a love song to another like robot that he's fallen in love with, and he tells her that she is his password and logs, and I felt that on a personal level, right? If someone to say, "Hey, you're like my logs," that hits
Oh,
deep.
that's so romantic.
I'm gonna write that down and just tuck that away.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what we want to do though, when we're talking about, you know, a castle, so we're talking about security foundations and we're talking about a castle. I want to know from everybody who's watching, which part of your castle do you think needs the most reinforcement? You know, it could be your is it your moat like a VPC? Is it your castle walls like firewall rules? Is it your watchtower where you're going to have some monitoring and logging? Is it your war room? Maybe like, your defenses are good, but your offenses are a little bit of needs prep. Like, where exactly in your castle do you think you need the most improvements? And now's the time to ask questions, because not only do we have Tristan, who is heavy into security, we also have Phani, who's a SME for security in the cloud. Like, you have the experts here, and then also somebody from incident response. So now's the time to ask all of your burning questions about foundations in cloud security. So let us know in the comments, and we will get to all of your questions.
Yeah. And if you also want us to try to go down the analogy path a little bit more and try to correlate services further down the castle path, let us know, because I picture Macy as that guy that's just running around ringing the bell like, hey, there's some danger. There's something here sensitive.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly. So we mentioned the shared responsibility model, right? So if anybody who's familiar with AWS, you've come across this many times. It's pretty much like repeated in all of our documentation. I've presented it a couple times. It's like in service agreements, essentially, but it is very important to know because it also tells you. Let me see if I can I? Yeah. It also tells you what kind of, like, not only where your responsibilities lie, but where in the cloud you need to focus on security. So if we're talking about the customer side of the responsibility in the shared responsibility model, the top one is your customer data, and you can create opportunities um, to secure that customer data by leveraging certain services. S3 has encryption. You can use KMS for all of your um, encryption needs for data in transit and at rest. You can use VPCs, making sure that like your data is in a locked chest on a remote island somewhere, like surrounded by a moat, maybe, and only have a drawbridge come down for people that are authenticated and authorized. Two different things to gain access to that data. And then, you can have several different things, such as like Fanny was saying, IAM, your identity and access management is a pretty huge one. So authentication and authorization, operating systems and network configurations, where exactly is your encryption going to lie? Is it customer side? Is it service side? Is it both? Those sort of things. So it's really good to understand where your responsibilities lie, where your data is sitting, and how you can leverage certain services and features in those services to protect those.
Yeah, it's definitely. I want to say when it comes to just a shared responsibility model, when it comes to understanding how you can dissect these different pieces into a castle analogy, it's perfect because you start to think of, okay, where did the responsibility lie, right? And this plays a big part when it comes to defending a castle because you have all these different jobs. Everybody has all these different layouts, right? You have a person to lower the drawbridge, right? And then you have the person that's actually checking the person coming in, right? So you want to make sure you understand all these role responsibilities and things of that nature, especially when it comes to the AWS cloud. If we go back full circle around the analogy, right? You want to know, hey, I'm building something. Who's going to consume it? How do I protect it? And start to answer these questions, right? So I think that's a very important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, and since we're using a castle analogy as well, it really ties into the actual concept of defense in depth. So why don't we start off with, the outside wall? So what would we use? And if you know this in the chat, you can let us know as well what you think you would use on your outer walls. Specifically for network security. Are there so some of the things could be security groups or VPCs, right? That you could configure your outer walls to defend your castle.
Yeah. And I would say we also have a question. So from the chat, so the user can be a human persona or a machine. So I think that is a really good question because when it comes to the identity house, and I might throw this over to Fanny because you love identity so much, is there's a lot of different personas, a lot of vantage points when it comes to dealing with identities and roles and things of that nature, right? So I think that's an important part to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a wide range of identities. It's a person can have multiple roles, as you imagine. They might play different roles in different scenarios. There's absolutely bots that are just kind of automated, maybe even simple as scripts running out in the internet that are just scraping. There could be something even more advanced that is looking for data, maybe trying to understand, maybe analyzing something on there. But there's a bunch of different ways that your data could be accessible. But there's also a bunch of different ways you can differently lock it down. There's also this concept of crown jewels, right? If we're going to talk about kind of like the cloud, you might have crown jewels that you're trying to keep even more safe. So you might place more rules around that. And as you mentioned, you might have uh, services like Macy, which understands like, okay, where are the crown rules? If you don't understand, well, I don't know where my PII is or my social security numbers are. It can understand for you, and then you can say, this is where I need to place higher security, like extra guards, like extra modes. I really like the concept of the war room. I
Mm,
think Shannon was mentioning that. I don't know. I just something about keeping everything central and understanding everything from a centralized place makes it very appealing, something like our security hub service. But uh, yeah,
something
I like
like it.
Yeah,
it.
yeah, something like that. And the other piece I would say is it's a very important perspective because you have like crown jewels, which could be the actual jewels in a safe within our castle, but then there might be something like the castle library, right, where it has all the different pieces of books
Ooh,
and
the
data and
knowledge.
information and knowledge. So looking at it from multiple perspectives, depending on the persona, also is very important, right? Because you don't want the defender to get into all of your knowledge that might have your strategies and your, you know, sensitive pieces of information, like what the king's favorite breakfast food is, right? All those little things that dial in.
Mm.
So I would say that was a really good question. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, actually it's really interesting to think about because a lot of people um some some particular customers might only think to protect their data that's residing in S3 or within their EC2 instances or RDS, right? Because that's data. But information about the environment, about the cloud, credentials specifically, is also really important to safeguard. So like if you have cloud formation templates that kind of give out all the information about where your data resides, who has access to what, that is also trade secrets that you want to keep. Credentials, using Secrets Manager will also help you keep those credentials safe and help you rotate them. So it's not just the data, but it's where is it, who's accessing it, how to access it. Those are very important to protect as well. So I have a poll for everyone to do, and I want to know um, which foundational element is the strongest in your cloud castle. So we're talking about drawbridges. Drawbridges might be your network access controls. Are you good with those ones? Um, your firewall rules. Do you have a guard tower? So identity management. Do you have a moat? And this is for an example. If I were to have, let's say, a web application being hosted on EC2 and it's using a database, an RDS database, I don't know if I want both castles side by side together because if one gets you know gets compromised, and the other one would also get compromised. So what do I do? Well, I can put one, and not every castle in my realm has to have a moat, but maybe the most important ones do. So I would put the RDS in a secure VPC that's not accessible to the public and put a moat around it. So essentially only specific people can access that, which would be just the guards that are in my first castle, but no one outside of that. So
Yeah,
everything else.
circular walls. All right.
Yeah.
The thing that pops into my mind, especially when you were talking for the anime fans out there, if you know Attack on Titan, the way the kingdom was designed was there was an outer circle, an inner circle, a middle circle, and then in the center was the main castle. So when you start to think about that, right, you can see, hey, maybe the outer circle folks or individuals or pieces of data, they only stay there and they don't really go back and forth. Maybe there's only a specific role of person, right? A knight or something along those lines that go in between everything. But not everybody needs to go all the way to the center of the castle, right? So
I
those are
love
different
this
ways.
comment too. Maybe the best
Yeah.
security really is another castle. Kind
Yeah.
of like what you like, kind of like the title. Multi-account strategies are honestly, they can get complicated. I totally understand. Sometimes, that can run away from you. However, separating the usage of that data, so like separating production from development, from Q&A, separating sensitive data from non-sensitive data, separating when we're and usage, so separating digital forensics analysis from the rest of production, making sure that you don't have individuals that are not supposed to be in a specific castle, that they can have access to every room in the castle, right? Just because of the princess doesn't mean that they get access to, like the baked goods in Castle 3, just because, what I'm saying? Like that's
Yeah.
Princess number 3's castle.
Yeah.
Like don't go stealing the bagels.
Yeah,
Thing.
she has dibs on, the the bagel in Castle 3. Yeah, and I think that is a very important part, and there's a bunch of comments that, start to go down that route, right? Our castles have towers too, controls towers, right? You see,
Oh,
they started to go down the path we were thinking,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
And to take the side tangent into control tower really quickly is a very big part, especially when you're trying to figure out, how do I start out control tower with a landing zone and having some of the AWS security best practices implemented from the start. Very good. Very good point.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost as if someone who developed some of these security services within AWS also had the analogy of defense in depth and started using some of those terms. Yeah, so we also, before we move forward, I want to say anybody who's joining now, thank you for joining. If you want more of our show, of our talk, please feel free to subscribe and follow the show. Follow AWS. Our show is going to be here every Monday throughout the year, so stay tuned for a lot more. So that's my little spiel. Just remember to follow and subscribe, and you'll get those notifications whenever we're coming online.
Yeah, exactly. And I would add in, if you want more analogies and more fun facts, we are here to provide those pieces. And I think there's another piece that we're here to provide as well. If I'm reading the comments right, I think we need to talk about something because we have a title, right? So we have a theme. So, of course, I think that means we have a side quest. And what I mean by that is we're about to go on a little bit of a side quest with, as side quest legend has it. I think this fits the theme. I have to change my voice a little bit because we're about to go on this side quest path, which is talking about our original point, is your resources are another castle. So imagine if you are an individual that was tasked with securing the cloud, how would you do it? Just like our persona today. So what we will do is add this to the side quest board and talk about a little bit of a customer story. So we had an AWS practitioner who was relatively new. They were part of the startups realm. And that startups realm, they were tasked with, of course, leading their cloud migration. And they had a grasp of everything on premises, but they have to figure out AWS cloud infrastructure. So what do? Where do they go? Well, to illustrate that, we have our side quest board here and out. So what we will take a second to understand is we have our individual, they are authorized and authenticated to do everything. And then we have AWS. What this board is meant to represent is their path to get from not having anything in place to being on their way to a target state security strategy that works for them in their position. And I would also ask the audience and kind of feel free to put in a chat. Have you ever been tasked or have experience with securing AWS environments in startup companies? And I will also pose this to Phani as well.
Yeah, a bunch of times. I think I've got it pretty pat down now to where I've done it a bunch of times. I have a couple of kind of key things. You obviously want to understand the core basics, make sure that you have your monitoring, your logging in place, you have proper authentication. And there's a lot of things that we discussed today in terms of like data protection and perimeter protection. Those are all true and those are all valid, but it might get, sometimes it's hard to understand what to do where in which context. But we make that easier for you in specific services. We touched on one of those called Security Hub. So I actually point customers to Security Hub and say, hey, pick which level of security you want, and those are provided to you in different compliance packs. So you can kind of pick like, hey, I'm just starting out, I just need something simple, make sure I have my core security covered. Or you can get something really advanced and someone say, I want to get FedRAMP, or I want to get NIST 853 compliant, and those are also available for you. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but it's really easy to just go to Security Hub, pick the pack that is relevant for you and turn it on, and then it kind of informs you about where you need to investigate and focus your efforts.
Yeah. And I think you made an important acknowledgement first, starting out with Security Hub. So on our path to having some security best practices in place, I put down it face up the Security Hub card, or however you want to put it. And I would also say to this comment, no, I am not a Dungeons and Dragons player.
You should be. That is a waste of talent if you're not.
Yeah. You know why? Because I have a love for the security game. And with the security at mind, as we progress forward on trying to get our individual to the security best practices, what are some other services? So we have Security Hub on the board. What should we implement, Phani? What do you think? What are services? Or Shannon, feel free to jump in as well.
So Security Hub will tell you to turn on one other service, CloudTrail,
Yes.
and you're going to need that. So this kind of goes hand in hand. But these are kind of again, from the metaphor perspective, that your war room, right? You got to have your war room in the middle, but then you also got to know kind of like what is happening at different places in your castle, and CloudTrail kind of can aggregate that information into your war room, so you can understand. Okay, well, these people are coming into my kitchen or whatever, but that's okay. They're authorized, or something else might not be.
They're authorized to the kitchen, but not the fridge, right?
Yeah.
It's a big thing. So
Yeah, exactly.
right. So we have CloudTrail, we have Security Hub, a couple more steps along the way to get to security best practices. So what I would say is, what kind of challenges do we have? Maybe we can accompany or accommodate for that. If I'm a new individual dealing with startups, is there any
Actually, somebody
challenges?
put in the comments that it can be a challenge to convince startup businesses the value of anything that isn't rapid feature development. So, Fanny, how do we get around those challenges with startups?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if you're talking about specific services like a Security Hub or Guard Duty, which I tell in and people, like, as soon as I get into an environment and say, turn these services on, they do a lot of the heavy lifting for you in terms of understanding threats and then telling you about them, which is like, more than half the battle. Once you understand it, you can take action towards it. And there is a cost to it, but it's all per usage, right? So it depends on how much logs you're producing and how many actions you want to track. So it's not something that's you have to put in a huge sunk of money down just to understand your thing. It's all about whatever usage is coming in, and it's pay per use, and it's also not designed in a way to uh, like really add up costs. Even if you want to turn it down, there's a couple of features in both Security Hub and Guard Duty where you can turn it on for 30 days free and understand what it's going to cost before you actually try to commit. So there's kind of a couple of levers built in to help you make that decision. And it's also not, these are not services where we're trying to make a lot of money off. These are intended to give you security best practices so that you prevent any type of malicious intent attacker or breach, rather than just saying this is a service that you should be uh, using just for the sake of it's not that it's to prevent specific breaches and incidents.
So along those same lines, I would say identity is a big piece,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If they're worried about turning on services, one of the starting points maybe can be from the identity perspective to start off with as well, right? So if we are going down as our individual, limited access, least privilege, all of those different words, because when you start to think about how do I secure my environment, how do I get to this target state that we want, I think that would be one of the pieces that we are looking to cover in our analogy.
Ooh,
So
someone said, what about activating WAF?
that I think that
that
is a good call.
that's a really good call. But before I touch on WAF, I just want to state for identity management, right? Not just least privilege, but we're talking about limiting your attack surface, making sure that if you are going to leverage IAM to its full potential, we're not just talking about creating users and creating groups and so on and having, these long-term access keys. I'm talking about removing long-term access keys completely. Like version 2, like leveled up IAM. We're talking roles. We're talking about yes, thank you. IAM roles. So making sure that we have temporary credentials to the environment at all times. Making sure that if at some point one of these IAM users or roles get compromised, it's very limited. Not just limited in time, but limited in what they can achieve in your environment. So if someone's not allowed, so like for example, if Tristan's the king of his castle and I'm coming in as a guest, I shouldn't be allowed to hire a whole bunch of new people, bring in all of my folks, bring in a whole bunch of my resources, or compromise any of Tristan's resources. I should only be allowed to do what a guest is allowed to do, which is access only my guest room, access only the food that he's giving me, and leave when I'm supposed to leave, sort of thing. Not overstay my welcome.
Yep. And all of that is true, especially for startups, as they're still trying to figure out their target state security job or target state security strategy, I would say, right? They don't know who needs access to what because they're still building out their organization. So some of those foundational pieces are important. And we put the WAF card down there, but I think if we have identity and roles, we have Security Hub, CloudTrail, Guard Duty. I think there's another piece that we can play from the security and incident response standpoint. If I throw I would say the conch, if you get that reference from Lord of the Flies, over to Shannon or Phani to talk about some security incident response. I think there's a service that came out in relation to that.
Ooh, before we go into that, we do have a comment in here about the chats. So we're actually streaming on 2 different platforms. One of them is Twitch and the other one is YouTube. So if you're not seeing some of the comments that were popping up, for example, this one, that's a Twitch. So just so you know, those that are coming in from YouTube, we do have several different streaming platforms. And so you'll see some different comments here and there.
But around security incident response, I'll kick it off and then maybe hand it over to Shannon. But it is a service where we can help you respond to incidents. So, for example, you might be experiencing a DDoS attack or a credential exposure, and you want to contain that. And on that note, before we get any further, MFA, always MFA. If don't forget that, right? Like that's probably like step 0 before you do anything, right? And it's relevant for everybody, but especially for startups. If you don't have a security team, if you don't know the specific checklist of items that you need to check off in terms of security, just MFA is like table stakes. Definitely add that wherever possible. But in case you had all that and some incident took place, like a breach, you can engage our incident response team that Shannon can tell you more examples of.
Yeah. Like right now?
Or maybe a quick one. Or...
Yeah. So, okay. So here's something that we've learned as an incident responder. Let's say you're using IAM and you have specific users and you have least privilege but you're using long-term credentials. However, you have MFA enabled. Okay, great. There are 2 ways to access the AWS console. One of them is logging into the console directly using username and password and providing an MFA into it. The other way is by leveraging the the access key and secret key that you've created for that particular user. If you do not safeguard this access key and the secret, you've provided somebody a way to get into the AWS environment, not through the console, but programmatically getting into it without having the need to MFA. So this is where roles come in, and it's very important because now you're not only talking about authentication, but you're talking about authorization. And that's kind of like something that people need to be reminded.
Yep. And I would say all those things are important to consider, especially we didn't mention everything. Like somebody mentioned credential management with KMS. That's another piece of the puzzle. And another thing to remember is we stream every Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, just so you want to join in the future. So thank you for setting up that comment. And as we continue on our side quests, we noticed, if we recap, we started out as an individual new to the AWS cloud. We traveled down the path of understanding Security Hub and CloudTrail and how they can relate, build up the security castle walls, and understand the flow of the data and how everybody needs to, let's say, maybe access or not access things based on identity. We also talked about some other security services like Guard Duty and WAF. And we also talked about incident response. And then we got to the place of heading towards AWS security best practices. And the little bucket right there is our S3 bucket. So what I would say is we're in a good place right now. There can be improvements. But as always, we have to hit the Zach Morris timeout button and go back to understand some more fundamental concepts to help build our stronghold a little bit more, a little bit better, and a little bit continuously in the automation realm, I would say. So with that being said, how do we get to this point of building up our stronghold? How do we continue our castle analogy? And I throw it to the floor to talk about it.
There's a couple of them. Oh, sorry, to us, Tristan, or in the chat?
No, to you.
I was gonna say, are you throwing it to the floor, to the wall, or to the watchtower? Like, which direction are you throwing this into?
See, that's a good question. Let's throw it to, I would say, the chamber. Right, that's a good word, right? Because we're all kings and queens and everything along those lines. So we're in the chamber, and then we flow. So, and feel free to answer in the chat as well, right?
But I do see a good one in the chat that mentions something like bastion hosts or tunnels. Bastion hosts, in like the traditional sense, are not the most secure because you are traditionally opening up network routes to target resources. The cloud way to do that is to use cloud IDEs, something like our AWS Cloud 9 service. This can use the same permissions as you have in your IAM role, so you don't have to do a lot of extra lifting. You just enable the service and you give access to the service, but then a user can log in and basically have terminal access and programmatic access into AWS through Cloud 9. So if you wanted to quickly get in, people do all kinds of use cases in Cloud9. You could be accessing databases, you could be accessing other servers, you could be deploying cloud infrastructure itself. So there's a lot of use cases that fit into Cloud9. You don't really have to think about bastion hosts. If you really have that use case, really look into something like an integrated cloud environment like Cloud9.
Yeah. Also, if you've never used Cloud9, it's actually a very pretty IDE. Like, it's very user friendly. It's
So
not.
I meant Cloud Shell. I mean, I do want to clarify. Cloud9 is actually was similar to Cloud Shell, but Cloud Shell is a little dialogue that shows up, and it's similar to Cloud9, but it's Cloud Shell.
Yeah, it's like your own little terminal thing.
Right.
We use it quite often when we're moving data from S3 bucket to S3 bucket, rather than going in and clicking on all the things and moving the stuff. Simple, easy AWS S3 sync commands will or copy commands will have you on your feet. I personally love it. You can also upload Python shells as well for easier, more automated things rather than like clicking everywhere and doing all the things. Just as long as you have the credentials to run the script and do all the things that are in that script, then yeah, I love Cloud Shell for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it provides you that secure mechanism to do so,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, so you're not dialing in from outside an environment, you're inside, right?
Yeah, you're
Little things like
already
that.
authenticated.
Yeah,
You can
So
also
exactly.
attach it to your VPCs, so you can, if you have
yeah.
something inside of a specific VPC, you can also communicate with that. That's a similar question, maybe related to that, around managed services for tunnels. Maybe they're talking about VPNs. There
Probably.
is
Yeah.
options to do VPNing. I think the modern way to do encrypted connections, right? You can still do VPNs. There's a service called site-to-site VPN that will give you uh, a secure connection, an encrypted connection to a device out in the field somewhere in a data center, maybe at a company location. But the you can also get encrypted traffic, and right now, even at Amazon, we rely on basically the identity level to
Mm-hmm.
allow us to encrypt traffic into it. So there's something called Amazon Verified Access that allows you to basically do encrypted connections into your cloud environments without actually having to spin up a VPN tunnel. But VPN tunnels are still there, site-to-site VPN. But if you're looking about just in authenticating users in an encrypted fashion to your cloud environments, AVA or Amazon Verified Access might be a more modern fit.
Yep.
Sweet.
That
Yeah.
definitely goes to the zero trust type of, I guess, conversational points, right? Especially
Yep.
when you talk about Ava and how users are entering your environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we go back to kind of your analogy of the kitchen, right, is how do you grant somebody access into your house, right? Before, I guess there would be maybe a gate, let's say, right? So you're at your home, there's a gate, somebody gets in your gate, now they have access to everything. But how do you do it? So maybe they have walls or protections in place where every room they go to, they have to authenticate and prove themselves that, hey, it is I want to access the kitchen area, right? I want to access the fridge, all these different things, right?
Yep.
And that's where you start to get to that zero trust type conversational point. So a
Yeah.
lot of different services. Yeah.
And you can also augment that as well to putting locks on the doors and making sure that, like, yeah, you say who you say you are, but are you supposed to have access to this? Um,
Yeah.
and those can be through key management.
Yep. Exactly. And all of this still fits within our castle analogy, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
so if we take our castle, so watchtowers, what would be the
Mhm.
watchtowers, not the control towers, the watchtowers in this, right? I think that's more of the monitoring detection standpoint, right? So uh what do you think, Fanny, when it comes to the monitoring aspect? What are some of the core fundamentals that somebody should have if they're just starting out?
Logs, and more logs, right? So log as much as you can. Obviously, you want to balance that with how much you want to store and how much you want to keep and how long you want to keep it for. But logs are extremely important in understanding what's happening at every level of the stack inside your cloud infrastructure, inside your applications, inside your databases. So a service like CloudWatch, which allows you to not only just store logs, but quickly view them, analyze them, aggregate them, build them on dashboards. That's all available to you in the CloudWatch service, but logs can be stored simply in an S3 bucket. That's very
Mhm.
common. But they can also be stored in a dedicated service like CloudWatch, which allows you to do more kind of like analysis
Yeah.
on the logs you're storing.
Yeah, and there's several different things depending on what you want to do with those logs, right? If you just want to keep them as retention, let's say for a rainy day, there's several different levels of S3 that you could use. You can use Glacier, for example, which is very cost efficient for people that just want to store logs. They don't want to do anything with them unless there's like a fire, and you want to know what happened. But you can store everything in Glacier and not really look at it unless you really need to. There's also infrequent access S3 as well. So things that you might want to look at, but maybe once a quarter for compliance and governance, right? That would be a solution. But also if you want to aggregate your logs, because there's different types of logs. There's your CloudTrail logs, your S3 access logs, you have your VPC flow logs. What if you want to aggregate all of that? Well, you also have Security Lake as an option. You also have CloudTrail Lake as well as another option. Now, Security Lake is pretty good because you can also bring in third-party logs. So, for example, your own logs, right? If you have your own VPN and you want those logs to be aggregated into Security Lake, perfect. Well, Security Lake also uses, what's it called? What's the format called? Oh,
OCSF, the
yeah,
Open
that's the one.
Cybersecurity Schema Framework. Yeah, got to spell it out in my head.
Yeah, that's the one. So now like your logs that are coming in, as well as third-party logs and all the AWS logs being aggregated into Security Lake, now it's all one format. So it's really easy for you to query and build up those stories of what happened if something were to happen, if you want to gain more interest. So that's kind of like a really good option. But you can simplify it, like what Phani said. You can store them in an S3 bucket and make sure that, maybe that S3 bucket only has specific users that are allowed to access. Or maybe it's an S3 bucket in a completely different AWS environment. Keep it separate.
Yeah. And the part that I would add to consider is usually what is the last step in the process, that incident response area, right? And that goes back to the war room piece of our castle and just trying to figure out, hey, out of all of these logs, when something is happening, when something is occurring, how do we deal with that? And I think that brings up an interesting question, right, Shannon, in terms of what we do. And I think we could throw that to the audience as well.
Yeah. So what are you using as a watchtower? And then like let us know in the comments what you're using as a watchtower. But also I want to know, because we were talking about before, we were talking about a war room, right? We were talking about security hub as being your focus for your war room, but what exactly do you want in there? And that's a poll that I have for everybody here. So what is in your war room? Do you have incident response playbooks? Do you have a SIM? Do you have automation scripts and run books? Maybe some communication tools? Or maybe you just have a war room and there's nothing in there yet and you want to know what to put into it. Well, we're here to tell you. But okay, so someone has a SIM. That's perfect. It's a really good way of, especially when you're aggregating your logs, getting notifications. One of the main things of having a war room is getting those notifications and being alerted that something is happening, in which case you can have individuals within that war room that's their responsibility is to look at that alert and determine if it's a false positive or if it's a true positive. And then if it's a true positive, maybe they'll have incident response playbooks or automation or run books to be able to implement, to be able to react to those alerts that they were made aware of.
Yeah. And if you're just joining in, put the numbers in the chat correlating to what you would want in your security war room, And I would say when it comes to the way I think is going around the playbook aspect of how do we deal with these specific items. Eventually we get to the automation, but if something were to pop up from the SIM, is there a playbook that correlates to that alert? Let's say a guard duty alert triggers. Okay, how do we deal with this within our environment? That's where my mind starts to go, right?
And who's responsible for it? And then what do you do afterwards, right? There's been numerous instances where a customer will come to my team and state, hey, we had an alert for this. And then I'll dig into the alert and it'll be like 6 months ago. And my main question would be, okay, what happened? Who touched it? Who notified it? And then what were you supposed to do afterwards? Sort of thing. So thankfully, it was just they had already dealt with it, but they were panicking because they thought it was a brand new alert, but they just never removed it. So it was kind of, those types of instances. You don't want those like unnecessary panic attacks during your day job.
Yeah. One or two. Let's try and limit it. We start to wean it off. There's 1 or 2 panic attacks, right? The command line freeze. I think that's one of the panic attacks I think we could all share when you hit the enter button and then something stops responding. You're like,
Oh,
What did I touch?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
what about you,
absolutely.
Fanny? Which one pops out to you?
Uh, for me, I'm big on Sims. That's kind of like it goes back to kind of having a centralized place to really understand what's going on. So you'll need a security information event management system. And that could be as simple as S3, like we talked about, right? But it could all be also more robust, like Security Lake.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
awesome.
I think there's a lot of points we touched upon, and I think there's something we need to delve into, and that specific piece is continuing the side quests. We talked about building our castle. We talked about how we can staff our castle. We even talked about the difference between the library and the jewels. So, if I'm a new adventurer, if I'm a new explorer, or if we keep with our castle analogy, if I'm just a recruit, how do I go about understanding what the next thing to do is? And that's where we start to delve into our knowledge quest. Knowledge quest is part of side quests where you start to think about how you can strengthen your castle through the knowledge perspective. So,
Hmm.
a couple of places that we can start off with. If we are a level 100 recruit, well, hey, let us be a watchtower recruit. And that's to delve into what do we have up? The security pillar and the well architected framework. So, I think this is a good place to start off. If you would agree, Fanny,
Hmm.
Shannon, I think that's a good place.
Yep, and it was just recently updated as well. So nothing is out of date on this boy. And also, just for those that are watching, we will share these resources on our LinkedIn. So go ahead and um, look out for that. But also, we want to make sure that everyone gets access to these resources. All the resources that we're sharing are free to access for all levels. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. And it's 100% to build up your knowledge so that you can take on further side quests. And if you want to continue down this path, so we're a watchtower recruit, talking about the security pillar, the well architected framework, good starting point. But say I wanted to take another step, delving a little bit deeper. I think if we wanted to become a keep defender, I think we need to go through the course route, a little bit more structured and a
Mhm.
little bit more, let's say, I want to say harder, but I think that's relative
I
because
think, yeah.
yeah, because yeah, you're starting to go down the route of just hey, sitting down and learning the different components and how they interact a little bit deeper.
Hmm.
What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on
now
that?
now that you've hit level 100, right, for knowledge gaining, this one is really good for knowledge application, and it is free to enroll. So if you go to the AWS Skill Builder website, you can enroll into this particular course, and we will provide that link as well. But it's specifically designed to not only introduce you to core concepts, but also help you implement and apply that new knowledge. It covers everything that we've talked about today too, so it's very very relevant to us.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the courses is a good place to start off. Also, the security blogs. That's where I always go to the articles of the day from is, hey, what do you grab after your 5 a.m. run? Of course, all of us do it, right? Grab 5 a.m. run, coffee, tea, water, the beverage of our choice, sit down at a terminal and start to say, hey, what's going on in the security world? And these security blogs, I would say, is another powerful tool just to understand based on what other customers, individuals, practitioners, people are doing when it comes to AWS security. And just reading and just getting ideas and inspirations is a big thing when it comes to the security blogs. And I think that's one of the powerful things. And they're updated very frequently.
Oh yeah, there's tons of new stuff that come out all the time. Um, Fanny, if I remember correctly, did you write a blog?
Not on this.
Not on this? Okay. Well, we should. We should write a blog and post it on here. But yeah, this, you can search it and you can find all the information that you want. There's tons of different um, solutions. There's tons of different announcements for services and features, etc., that you can dive into. Highly recommended.
Yep. And if you continue on your path, so you went from Watchtower Recruit to Keep Defender. So now, if you level up a little bit more, you become the castle's warden, in charge of all the security within the castle and understanding how all the pieces fit together. And I think when you're a castle warden, you need to be a little bit more hands-on at certain points. So that's where we have the security workshop. And what is a security workshop tied into? Well, the well-architected framework. Hey, you see how it comes full circle? Right? We didn't plan that at all. Of course not. Right? So I think this is a very good place. Phani, have you sat in this workshop or performed this workshop?
I've done portions of it. There's a lot of different labs in here, but I've done a lot of the identity ones, like simple IAM role setup. I think a lot more identity center focused nowadays. Also did some in infrastructure protection, like figuring out if your EC2 instances are vulnerable to CVEs. And there's a lot of other good stuff in here that I would look into, but yeah, identity and data protection, I think, are some of the ones that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think those are some important side quests to go on and knowledge quests because, hey, you can do this all at your own pace, any time of the day. You want to wake up in the middle of the night and say, hey, I want to try this workshop out? Go ahead and let us know. Ping us on LinkedIn or in the comments. Just,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I completed this quest. And we will give you a couple of claps, right? And also maybe shout you out every once in a while, right? So I think out of everything, one of the things that maybe we could bring up is the biggest cloud security challenge as we start to understand, hey, we went through a lot of things and there may be other challenges we may not have covered. So what's your biggest cloud security challenge? Feel free.
For myself, I think data protection is probably the hardest one because not only do I need to know what my data is and where it's sitting, but who's allowed to access it, when it's being accessed by certain services, not just people. Making sure that it's encrypted not only at rest but also in transit. I think data protection is probably the hardest. In my opinion, also network security. I am not a network me at all. It gets really complicated really quickly for me. But network security and data protection are probably my top two.
I would agree. I've also seen a lot of challenges in compliance and governance. I think we make, like, when it's like a purely like technical decision of like, hey, whether this needs to be encrypted or not, like whether something needs to have a route or not, those are a little bit more straightforward. But when it comes to kind of compliance and governance, there's sometimes nuance around how a control might get interpreted, and there might also be a lot of requirements that get passed down from somewhere else where you don't have a lot of insight into like why this requirement is. So I think there's just gray areas that come up in compliance and governance that make it a little bit more challenging. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
where I've seen it.
And I would say really quickly for me, it would be between data protection and compliance because, hey, data classification, sensitive data, non-sensitive data. This is important. This may not be as important. All of those things. Right?
For sure. So we have 1 minute left before we end this stream. I want to thank everybody in the chat for joining and making this a super engaging and super interesting conversation. You all asked really great questions and made some really good points. I want to thank Phani specifically for coming on as a guest, as our SME for Cloud Security Foundations. Thank you again. Always appreciate you joining. And I also want to make sure that everyone knows that we are going to be building out a landing page so that all those resources, if you're not using LinkedIn, you'll be able to access them on our landing page as well as previously recorded streams as well. And also, I want to thank Tristan. Tristan, you're an awesome co-host. I always love having chats with you. I love your board. And for those who don't know, our next episode is going to be next Monday at same time, same place, and we will see you there.
Yes. Thank you. And we can close out with that. So thank you. Cheers. And happy Monday, everybody. And take
Happy
care.
Monday.
Keep on side questing. All right.
Thanks, Tristan. Thanks, Shannon.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. See ya.
Take care.